The silence inside the Privy Council chamber lasted only seconds after the document was revealed, but according to palace insiders, those few seconds changed everything. Prince William reportedly stared at the revised succession memorandum in disbelief before abruptly pushing back his chair and walking out without a word. Senior aides froze. Courtiers exchanged panicked glances. And at the center of the storm stood Queen Camilla, accused in whispers of securing a place in a royal structure many believed should never have included her. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What began as a routine constitutional briefing reportedly transformed into one of the most explosive private confrontations the monarchy has faced in years. Sources close to palace administrative circles claim the atmosphere inside the chamber shifted the moment the revised succession framework was quietly distributed among senior attendees. At first, several officials allegedly believed the amendment was procedural, minor, technical. The sort of document that rarely sparks emotional reaction inside an institution built on discipline and restraint. But then William reached the final pages. And according to insiders whispering from behind the palace's carefully protected walls, everything changed. Reports suggest King Charles had personally approved revisions tied to emergency continuity planning during ongoing concerns surrounding his health. Those same reports claimed the amendment expanded ceremonial influence connected to Queen Camilla during possible future regency discussions. To outsiders, that might sound insignificant. But within the deeply guarded mechanics of the monarchy, even symbolic authority carries enormous weight. Every title, every clause, every constitutional adjustment becomes part of what royal historians often describe as the sacred machinery of the crown. And according to multiple interpretations now circulating among palace staff, William immediately recognized the deeper implications hidden beneath the carefully polished language of the memorandum. Insiders claim the Prince of Wales had not been fully briefed beforehand. In fact, some suggest he learned of the adjustment only moments before the council proceedings officially began. That detail alone reportedly triggered alarm inside. Eyed the Wales household. Because for weeks, there had already been growing whispers that something unusual was unfolding behind closed doors. Palace aides allegedly noticed increasingly private meetings involving senior constitutional advisors, trusted legal staff, and members of the king's inner circle. Catherine herself, according to individuals familiar with Kensington Palace operations, had quietly warned close aides that something major appeared to be developing in complete secrecy. At the time, few understood exactly what she meant. But now those warnings were suddenly being viewed in an entirely different light. The tension reportedly escalated almost immediately after William questioned why Princess Anne and Prince Edward had not been informed earlier about the proposed changes. Sources whisper that the future king viewed their exclusion as deeply troubling, particularly given Anne's long-standing role as one of the monarchy's most trusted institutional guardians. For decades, Anne has been seen as the iron-willed defender of royal continuity, someone whose loyalty is directed not toward personalities, but toward preserving the stability of the crown itself. Edward, meanwhile, Isle has quietly built a reputation among royal insiders as the careful protector of protocol and constitutional precision. The idea that both had allegedly been kept outside critical discussions reportedly intensified William's suspicions that the amendment had been deliberately shielded from members of the old guard likely to resist it. As the confrontation unfolded, sources claim King Charles appeared visibly drained. Some insiders even suggest the king attempted to calm tensions by framing the changes as temporary safeguards designed to preserve stability during uncertain times. But according to whispers now spreading through palace administrative circles, William was unconvinced. To him, the issue was not merely about temporary ceremonial adjustments. It was about precedent, about boundaries, about what happens when private influence begins quietly attaching itself to constitutional structures that were never designed to accommodate ambiguity. And within hours, staff members had allegedly begun using a phrase that would spread through royal corridors with astonishing speed: the Camilla succession clause. Royal commentators were quick to recognize the seriousness of the moment. Several insiders compared the dispute to the volatile institutional struggles that followed Queen Elizabeth II's final years, when questions surrounding continuity, duty, and legacy became increasingly sensitive behind palace walls. Because beneath the polished statements and ceremonial appearances, the monarchy has always operated through fragile balances of trust. Once that trust fractures even slightly, every conversation becomes dangerous. Every silence becomes suspicious. Every private meeting suddenly carries the weight of possible betrayal. And according to those closest to the situation, William's dramatic walkout was never simply an emotional reaction. It was a warning shot fired directly into the heart of the institution itself. But what shocked William most was not the amendment itself, it was the realization that this plan may have been quietly building for years behind palace walls. Long before William entered that council chamber, insiders claim an invisible battle had already begun deep within the monarchy's constitutional machinery. Hidden beneath ceremonial traditions and polished royal appearances was an unfolding struggle over influence, authority, and the future. Size and shape of the crown itself. According to palace whispers now circulating far beyond Buckingham Palace corridors, the seeds of the crisis were planted months earlier, shortly after concerns surrounding King Charles's health reportedly intensified in early 2024. What initially appeared to be routine continuity planning soon evolved into something far more delicate and politically dangerous. Senior advisors, constitutional aides, and longtime members of the royal establishment allegedly began holding increasingly private discussions regarding what would happen during any prolonged royal absence. On paper, the conversations were said to focus on stability, preservation, continuity. But according to various interpretations emerging from palace insiders, another objective slowly began taking shape beneath the surface, one centered around securing Queen Camilla's long-term institutional standing inside the monarchy itself. Sources close to palace administration claim the discussions moved far beyond ordinary ceremonial matters. There were reportedly conversations involving future state representation, internal council access, advisory influence, and emergency constitutional coordination. During periods of royal uncertainty. To outsiders, such matters might sound procedural, but within the monarchy, every adjustment carries symbolic meaning. The crown survives not merely through law, but through perception, through carefully maintained hierarchy, through centuries of unspoken boundaries that are rarely crossed without consequence. And according to individuals familiar with the atmosphere inside the palace, William began sensing that those boundaries were quietly shifting in ways he found deeply alarming. At the same time, reports suggest Camilla gradually expanded what insiders described as a highly discreet private advisory network. Trusted aides, senior social allies, constitutional consultants. Individuals whose influence reportedly grew stronger as Charles's condition became an increasing concern behind closed doors. Palace staff allegedly noticed subtle but unmistakable changes in how certain decisions were being routed. Meetings became smaller, information became tighter, access became increasingly controlled. Some insiders even whispered that members of the old guard were beginning to feel isolated from conversations they once would have naturally been included. Dead in. And within royal households built on loyalty, silence often becomes far more dangerous than open conflict. William, however, was not standing still. According to several interpretations from royal commentators, he and Princess Anne had already begun quietly organizing what certain palace figures allegedly referred to as the Heirs Accord. The effort reportedly focused on protecting direct bloodline continuity and preserving the traditional constitutional structure surrounding the future reign of Prince George. Anne's involvement was said to be especially significant. For decades, she has carried the reputation of being one of the monarchy's fiercest defenders, a royal figure who places institutional duty above personal emotion. Insiders claim Anne viewed any attempt to blur hereditary succession lines as a threat to the crown's long-term credibility. And as tensions grew, William reportedly found himself relying more heavily on Anne's judgment than ever before. The conflict intensified dramatically after allies close to Camilla allegedly began arguing that her role following the coronation of 2023 justified a more permanent constitutional position within the monarchy's future. 3. Your framework. That argument reportedly unsettled not only William, but also several senior royal traditionalists who feared public backlash if such discussions ever became widely known. Palace whispers suggest certain legal advisors even referenced obscure historical precedents involving consort participation during periods of royal instability. But critics inside the institution allegedly viewed those arguments as dangerously selective interpretations of royal history, crafted less around constitutional necessity and more around expanding influence during a vulnerable moment for the crown. Catherine, according to those familiar with Kensington Palace operations, remained outwardly composed throughout the growing tensions. But privately, insiders claim she became increasingly concerned about how the public might react if reports of internal maneuvering ever surfaced. The Princess of Wales reportedly understood something others inside the palace were beginning to fear: that the monarchy was entering a uniquely fragile period where even whispers of political manipulation could severely damage public trust. Royal historians, commentators, and constitutional observers allegedly began quietly debating whether the institution risked appearing divided at precisely the moment it needed unity most. Because beneath the polished appearances and carefully controlled public statements, the monarchy was no longer simply managing a health crisis. It was confronting a silent struggle over who would ultimately shape the future direction of the crown itself. And according to insiders, the deeper William investigated the framework, the more he began to suspect this was never meant to stay temporary. To critics within the old guard, this was never simply about protocol, it was about power. And whispers surrounding Queen Camilla's growing reach inside palace operations had reportedly been intensifying long before the Privy Council confrontation exploded into view. According to sources familiar with the increasingly tense atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace, concerns surrounding Camilla's influence began quietly escalating during the periods when King Charles's treatment schedule reportedly became more demanding. What initially appeared to be temporary adjustments tied to the king's health slowly evolved into something many longtime royal staff members allegedly found deeply unsettling. Access points changed, meeting structures shifted. Certain discussions surrounding scheduling, ceremonial planning, and state coordination reportedly became filtered through what insiders started privately calling the domestic diplomacy circle surrounding the Queen. To the public, the monarchy still projected discipline, calm, and continuity. But behind palace walls, insiders whispered that frustration was steadily building among officials who believed constitutional lines were becoming dangerously blurred. Reports suggest Camilla increasingly gained indirect control over which advisors, courtiers, and administrative staff were granted proximity to key scheduling conversations during Charles's treatment periods. Some palace aides allegedly felt the traditional hierarchy was quietly being rewritten in real time. Individuals who had served the institution for decades reportedly found themselves sidelined from conversations they once would have naturally attended. Others claim recommendations linked to ceremonial appearances and future planning began moving through newer channels tied more closely to Camilla's trusted allies than to the traditional royal structure itself. And within an institution built entirely upon invisible rules, even subtle shifts in access can signal dramatic changes in power. William, according to insiders close to Kensington Palace, reportedly viewed the expansion as a growing threat to long-term institutional stability. To him, the issue was never personal resentment, it was constitutional survival. The Prince of Wales allegedly feared that temporary accommodations surrounding Charles's illness were slowly evolving into permanent precedents that future generations of the monarchy might struggle to contain. Sources claim William became especially alarmed by discussions involving ceremonial continuity and advisory participation tied to future regency scenarios. Because once informal influence enters official structures, palace historians know it rarely retreats quietly. Princess Anne reportedly shared many of those concerns. For years, Anne has been viewed by royal insiders as the immovable guardian of hereditary continuity. Someone who believes the monarchy survives only when its boundaries remain unmistakably clear. According to various palace whispers, Anne privately opposed any arrangement that risked softening the distinctity on between direct succession and supportive royal partnership. To her, critics suggest, the monarchy could not afford ambiguity during a period already overshadowed by uncertainty surrounding Charles's health. And as tensions deepened, Anne allegedly became increasingly vocal in private conversations involving constitutional planning and long-term succession stability. Prince Edward, though characteristically quieter, was also reportedly uneasy. Sources claim he privately warned senior aides against what he allegedly described as constitutional confusion within public-facing royal structures. Edward's concerns, according to insiders, centered less around personalities and more around perception. The monarchy relies heavily on public trust, and palace officials reportedly feared that unclear authority structures involving ceremonial influence, advisory power, and regency symbolism could eventually create dangerous misunderstandings surrounding the future roles of George, Charlotte, and Louis. Several insiders allegedly worried that once those lines became blurred internally, they would become nearly impossible to explain publicly without inviting controversy. Rumors surrounding internal resistance did not remain entirely contained within palace walls. Royal commentators connected to publications including The Times and Tatler reportedly began hearing fragments of concern months before the council confrontation occurred. At first, the whispers sounded vague. References to institutional discomfort, mentions of private tensions, hints of disagreement between generations inside the House of Windsor. But according to individuals close to royal media circles, the pattern slowly became impossible to ignore. Staff leaks allegedly described growing unease surrounding unelected influence tied to ceremonial planning and constitutional coordination. And while no one publicly challenged the Queen's position, insiders claim many feared the monarchy was drifting toward a dangerous gray zone where personal loyalty risked overshadowing established royal structure. For some within the institution, the situation reportedly carried echoes of historical succession crises the monarchy spent generations trying to avoid. Royal historians allegedly began privately drawing comparisons to earlier eras when blurred authority structures triggered confusion, factionalism, and instability within the crown. The fear was not immediate collapse. It was gradual erosion. Quiet uncertainty spreading beneath polished public appearances until trust itself became fragile. And according to palace whispers, William increasingly realized the issue was becoming larger than Camilla, larger than Charles, and even larger than the current reign itself. It was becoming a battle over the future identity of the monarchy. But the true breaking point came when William allegedly discovered a second document, one that changed the entire meaning of the council meeting. According to multiple palace whispers, the first succession revision was only the beginning. What truly stunned William was an alleged supplemental memorandum outlining ceremonial authority structures that extended far beyond temporary royal support. By the time the second document reportedly surfaced inside the Privy Council chamber, insiders claimed the atmosphere had already become dangerously tense. But what William allegedly discovered in those additional pages transformed concern into outright alarm. Sources familiar with the situation suggest the memorandum outlined expanded consultative powers connected to Queen Camilla during future transitional constitutional periods. At first glance, the language appeared cautious, almost harmless. References to continuity coordination, advisory participation, ceremonial representation during periods of uncertainty. But according to several palace interpretations now circulating among royal staff, the deeper implications became impossible to ignore once the framework was fully understood. The proposal allegedly included discussions involving future council influence tied to state representation and internal advisory coordination should Charles become temporarily unable to fulfill certain duties. Insiders claim there were even references to enhanced consultative visibility during sensitive constitutional moments involving the monarchy's public operations. To critics within the institution, however, this was no longer about assisting a recovering king. It was about quietly constructing an alternative structure of influence around the crown itself. And according to sources close to Kensington Palace, William immediately recognized the danger such arrangements could pose to the future authority of the direct royal line. For the Prince of Wales, insiders whisper, the issue became intensely personal the moment Prince George's future position entered the equation. Palace aides allegedly claim William viewed the proposal as an erosion of hereditary clarity at the exact moment the monarchy needed absolute stability. The future king reportedly feared that expanding unofficial ceremonial influence during transitional periods could gradually weaken the public's understanding of where constitutional authority truly belonged. George, Charlotte, and Louis were no longer abstract figures in distant succession planning. They had become central to a growing institutional battle unfolding quietly behind palace walls. And according to several insiders, that realization changed William's entire approach moving forward. Inside Kensington Palace, tensions reportedly escalated rapidly in the hours following the discovery. Sources claim Catherine urged restraint as emotions intensified around her husband. Unlike others inside the royal structure, the Princess of Wales allegedly understood the devastating consequences that public exposure of the dispute could trigger. The monarchy, already navigating uncertainty surrounding Charles's health, could not afford visible division among senior royals. Yet privately, insiders suggest Catherine shared many of William's concerns. She reportedly feared the institution risked drifting into constitutional ambiguity during one of the most fragile periods of the modern royal era. And while she encouraged caution, palace whispers suggest even Catherine was deeply unsettled by the contents of the supplemental memorandum. Princess Anne, however, was allegedly far less restrained. According to various interpretations from royal insiders, Anne viewed the proposals as institutionally reckless, a phrase that reportedly circulated rapidly among senior aides after private consultations took place behind closed doors. For Anne, critics claim, the issue was simple. The monarchy survives through discipline, continuity, and unmistakable hierarchy. Any framework that introduced overlapping ceremonial authority risked weakening the crown from within. And as palace officials debated the implications of the document, another phrase allegedly began spreading through administrative circles with increasing urgency. Parallel monarchy. That term reportedly terrified longtime royal staff members more than any individual. Dual proposal itself. Because once the idea of dual influence structures enters the monarchy, confusion follows quickly behind it. Several aides allegedly feared the public could eventually struggle to distinguish between hereditary authority and ceremonial partnership. Others worried future regency discussions involving George, Charlotte, and Louis might become vulnerable to political interpretation if unofficial structures gained normalized influence during periods of royal transition. Palace insiders even began quietly comparing the situation to earlier constitutional crises the monarchy had spent generations trying to bury beneath carefully rebuilt public trust. King Charles, according to sources close to the palace, defended the arrangement as a stabilizing safeguard during uncertain health conditions. Some insiders claimed the king genuinely believed expanded consultative support surrounding Camilla would help preserve continuity if future medical complications emerged. But even among Charles's closest allies, whispers of concern reportedly began growing louder. Several senior figures allegedly feared catastrophic public backlash if details surrounding the memorandum ever surfaced, said beyond private royal circles. Because beneath the constitutional language and carefully crafted explanations, one terrifying question continued haunting palace corridors. Had the monarchy accidentally begun creating a second center of royal power during one of the most vulnerable chapters of Charles's reign? And as outrage spread through royal circles, Princess Anne reportedly decided the time for quiet resistance was over. If William's walkout was the explosion, Princess Anne's response was the cold, calculated counterstrike that followed. Palace insiders claimed the Princess Royal moved with surgical precision to contain what she allegedly viewed as a constitutional overreach, threatening the sacred balance of the monarchy. According to sources close to royal administrative circles, Anne wasted very little time after details surrounding the supplemental memorandum began spreading through palace corridors. While public attention remained focused on William's dramatic departure from the Privy Council chamber, insiders claimed the Princess Royal, quietly began organizing what aides allegedly nicknamed the Crown Continuity Protocol. The phrase itself reportedly carried enormous weight. T inside the institution. Because when Anne moves, palace veterans understand she rarely acts from emotion alone. She acts from duty, from calculation, from an almost uncompromising belief that the monarchy survives only when its constitutional foundations remain untouched by personal ambition or institutional confusion. Emergency consultations allegedly began almost immediately, involving senior constitutional advisors, trusted legal staff, and several longtime figures connected to the monarchy's internal governance structures. Palace whispers suggest Anne insisted on reviewing every procedural layer tied to the proposed authority expansion surrounding Camilla's future role. What alarmed her most, according to insiders, was not simply the wording of the memorandum itself, but the possibility that it had advanced so far without broader institutional scrutiny. Some aides allegedly viewed the situation as a failure of traditional palace safeguards. Others reportedly feared something far worse, that a second power structure had quietly begun forming inside the monarchy during one of the weakest periods of Charles's reign. Prince Edward, long regarded as one of the most cautious and discreet members of the royal family, reportedly joined William in demanding immediate clarification regarding succession boundaries and ceremonial authority. Sources claim Edward became increasingly concerned that public-facing confusion surrounding constitutional roles could permanently damage trust in the institution if left unresolved. Unlike louder royal conflicts that explode into headlines, this battle was unfolding in silence, through memorandums, through procedural reviews, through carefully controlled meetings hidden behind layers of royal protocol. But according to insiders, the emotional pressure building beneath those formal structures was becoming unbearable. Reports suggest key administrative reviews were quietly launched across several council procedures connected to future continuity planning. Senior staff allegedly began re-examining advisory chains, ceremonial coordination mechanisms, and consultative authority structures tied to periods of royal transition. Palace officials who once believed the proposals would pass quietly through internal review reportedly found themselves suddenly pulled into intense constitutional debates. Some insiders even whispered that certain administrative recommendations were temporarily frozen as Anne's network pushed for deeper scrutiny. And as the old guard mobilized, the palace atmosphere reportedly shifted from discomfort into outright institutional anxiety. At the center of the crisis stood King Charles himself. According to palace whispers, the king increasingly appeared trapped between loyalty to Camilla and mounting pressure from Anne, William, and senior traditionalists determined to preserve hereditary clarity at all costs. Sources close to the palace claim Charles viewed himself as protecting stability during uncertain health conditions. But critics inside the institution allegedly believed he had underestimated the long-term consequences of allowing expanded ceremonial influence to develop around unofficial structures. Every attempt to calm tensions reportedly seemed to deepen suspicion instead. And for the first time since his coronation, Charles allegedly faced growing fears that his own family no longer viewed the monarchy through the same lens. William's silence in the aftermath only intensified speculation. Publicly, the Prince of Wales said almost nothing. Several scheduled appearances were scheduled, abruptly cancelled without detailed explanation, fueling endless rumors across royal media circles. But according to commentators familiar with palace dynamics, that silence masked intense private negotiations unfolding behind closed doors. Some insiders claim William was engaged in direct discussions with Anne and Edward regarding future constitutional safeguards. Others suggest Kensington Palace had entered full strategic containment mode, desperately trying to prevent deeper fractures from spilling into public view. Whatever the truth may be, the lack of clarity only increased the sense of crisis surrounding the monarchy. Meanwhile, morale inside palace offices reportedly began collapsing under the weight of growing uncertainty. Staff leaks allegedly described rising fears of factional warfare developing between supporters of Camilla and defenders of traditional succession structures. Longtime aides found themselves navigating an atmosphere filled with suspicion, whispered conversations, and invisible alliances. Yet Camilla's allies reportedly pushed back aggressively against the backlash, insisting the outrage was exaggerated and rooted in long-standing resentment toward the Queen rather than genuine constitutional concern. According to those close to her circle, they believed Camilla was being unfairly targeted during a period when she had remained loyal to Charles throughout immense personal strain. But beneath every denial, every private reassurance, and every carefully managed statement, one terrifying possibility continued hanging over the House of Windsor like a storm waiting to break. Because for all the constitutional debates and procedural language, the real crisis was no longer about memorandums or ceremonial authority alone. It was about trust, about loyalty, about whether the monarchy could survive a growing divide inside its own bloodline without tearing itself apart in the process. But behind closed doors, the monarchy now faced an even greater danger: the possibility that the royal family itself was splitting into rival camps. The greatest threat to the monarchy was never a newspaper headline or a political scandal. According to royal insiders, it was the slow fracture unfolding inside the House of Windsor itself, a division now impossible to fully conceal after William's dramatic departure from the council chamber. In the days that followed the confrontation, palace sources claim something inside the royal family fundamentally changed. Publicly, the institution continued projecting its familiar image of stability, discipline, and calm continuity. Engagements proceeded. Statements remained carefully measured. The machinery of monarchy kept moving. But beneath that polished exterior, insiders whisper that trust between the Wales household and Camilla's inner circle deteriorated with startling speed. Conversations reportedly became colder. Coordination between aides allegedly narrowed to only essential communication. Even longtime palace officials accustomed to navigating royal tensions quietly admitted this felt different, more dangerous, more permanent. Because for the first time in years, the conflict no longer appeared manageable through private compromise alone. According to various interpretations from royal insiders, King Charles desperately attempted to contain the damage before it became irreversible. Reports suggest the king quietly arranged several private reconciliation meetings involving senior family members and trusted advisors. Some sources claim Charles hoped emotional honesty might ease tensions that constitutional language had only intensified. Others suggest he simply feared history repeating itself inside a monarchy already exhausted by years of public turbulence. But insiders whisper those conversations achieved little progress. The deeper issue was no longer just the memorandum itself. It was the growing belief among William's supporters that institutional trust had been broken behind closed doors without warning. At Kensington Palace, Catherine reportedly focused intensely on shielding George, Charlotte, and Louis from the widening crisis unfolding around them. According to aides familiar with the atmosphere inside the Wales household, the Princess of Wales became increasingly protective as palace speculation intensified. She allegedly feared the children could eventually become trapped inside a constitutional battle they were far too young to fully understand. George's future role as king had suddenly become central to private succession debates. Charlotte and Louis, meanwhile, reportedly became symbols of the direct royal line William believed needed protection from any form of institutional ambiguity. And according to insiders, Catherine recognized the emotional toll this Lent was beginning to take on the entire family. Anne and Edward, meanwhile, allegedly intensified their efforts behind the scenes. Sources suggest both royals pushed aggressively for what they described as the restoration of clear constitutional boundaries before confusion surrounding ceremonial authority could spread further. Anne reportedly viewed the situation as a defining institutional test for the monarchy itself. Edward, though quieter in public, was said to be equally concerned that blurred structures risked undermining long-term public confidence in the crown. Together with William, they allegedly formed a united front dedicated to preserving what they saw as the monarchy's most sacred principle: that hereditary continuity must remain unmistakably clear during periods of transition and uncertainty. Royal historians observing the growing turmoil reportedly became increasingly alarmed by the broader implications. Several commentators warned that the monarchy risked appearing unstable during a period already overshadowed by health concerns. Generational transition, and public scrutiny. According to palace whispers, some senior officials feared the crisis could be permanent. TLY alter how the public viewed Charles's reign. Instead of being remembered solely as a modernizing monarch navigating difficult times, there were growing concerns he might also become associated with constitutional ambiguity and internal division. And for an institution built almost entirely on symbolism, perception can become just as dangerous as reality itself. Many insiders now believe William's walkout marked more than an emotional reaction. They reportedly view it as a generational turning point inside the crown. A moment when the future king signaled he would no longer quietly tolerate blurred lines between hereditary authority and expanding ceremonial influence. The phrase duty before compromise allegedly became central to William's private stance moving forward. To supporters of the Prince of Wales, the issue was never about personal hostility toward Camilla. It was about defending the long-term integrity of the monarchy before temporary accommodations evolved into permanent constitutional precedent. Across official residences, palace staff allegedly described an atmosphere of icy silence settling over royal operations afterward. Longtime aides whispered about strained meetings, shortened discussions, and invisible divisions forming between competing camps inside the institution. Some insiders claim future succession planning may now be rewritten entirely in response to the backlash triggered by the council confrontation. Because once doubt enters the monarchy's internal structure, restoring certainty becomes extraordinarily difficult. And according to those closest to the unfolding crisis, the House of Windsor was no longer simply managing a family disagreement. It was confronting a battle over what the monarchy itself would ultimately become in the decades ahead. Because in the end, this was never simply about Camilla, William, or even Charles. It was about who controls the future story of the crown itself. For King Charles, the fallout reportedly became deeply personal. What may have begun as an attempt to protect his wife's standing inside an uncertain royal future had now evolved into one of the most emotionally devastating conflicts of his reign. According to palace insiders, the king was profoundly shaken by William's reaction inside the Privy Council chamber, and even more disturbed by what followed afterward. Sources close to royal operations. Ons claim Charles initially believed the revised succession framework would be viewed as a practical safeguard during a period of extraordinary uncertainty surrounding his health. In his mind, insiders suggest, the proposal was never intended to challenge the direct line of succession or weaken the future authority of Prince William and Prince George. Instead, the king allegedly viewed it as a stabilizing mechanism designed to protect continuity if the monarchy faced prolonged instability. But what Charles reportedly failed to anticipate was the emotional and constitutional earthquake those documents would trigger once they became known inside the royal family. Palace whispers suggest the king quickly realized the situation had become far more serious than a disagreement over ceremonial structure. William's abrupt departure reportedly struck Charles on a deeply personal level because it symbolized something far more painful than political resistance. It represented distance, distrust, a fracture between father and son at a moment when the monarchy needed unity more than ever. Several insiders claim Charles feared permanent damage inside the family, particularly as tensions between Kensington Palace and Camilla's allies continued hardening behind closed doors. The king, already burdened by illness and institutional pressure, allegedly found himself emotionally exhausted by a crisis he believed he had created while trying to preserve stability. Camilla, however, reportedly remained far less apologetic. According to sources familiar with her circle, the Queen strongly defended the idea that her loyalty to Charles throughout years of public scrutiny and personal hardship justified expanded institutional recognition during uncertain times. Allies close to her allegedly argued she had stood beside Charles during some of the most turbulent chapters in modern royal history and deserved greater formal standing as a result. To supporters of the Queen, the backlash unfolding inside the palace was not rooted in constitutional concern alone. They reportedly viewed much of the resistance as lingering resentment from traditionalists who never fully accepted Camilla's position inside the monarchy despite years of careful public rehabilitation. William, however, allegedly interpreted the entire situation very differently. Sources close to the Wales household suggest the Prince, CE of Wales, increasingly believed the proposed arrangements threatened the future clarity of hereditary authority itself. To him, insiders claim the issue was not about denying Camilla respect or recognition. It was about ensuring that temporary emotional considerations did not permanently alter the constitutional balance surrounding the future reigns of George, Charlotte, and Louis. Palace aides reportedly described William as becoming more resolute with each passing day. Convinced that preserving the monarchy's long-term credibility required drawing unmistakable lines before public confusion could take root. Princess Anne reportedly reinforced that position during several tense private discussions involving senior family members. According to various interpretations circulating among palace insiders, Anne urged Charles to prioritize institutional continuity over emotional compromise, warning that the monarchy could not afford ambiguity during a period already overshadowed by uncertainty and generational transition. For Anne, critics suggest, the crown's survival depended on discipline rather than sentiment. And while she reportedly sympathized with Charles's emotional motivation, she allegedly believed the king was allowing personal loyalty to cloud his constitutional judgment at an extraordinarily dangerous moment. Royal commentators observing the growing crisis quietly began comparing the situation to earlier royal conflicts shaped by succession anxieties and accusations of favoritism. Some historians allegedly warned that the monarchy risked reopening wounds tied to past periods, when emotional decisions inside the royal household destabilized public confidence in the institution. Others feared the internal division now unfolding could permanently overshadow Charles's reign, if not resolved quickly and decisively. Because beneath every private negotiation and carefully managed public appearance, the same terrifying question continued hanging over Buckingham Palace. Had the monarchy begun drifting into constitutional uncertainty precisely when it needed absolute clarity? Meanwhile, staff whispers reportedly described Charles appearing increasingly isolated during subsequent internal meetings. Longtime aides allegedly noticed growing exhaustion surrounding the king as competing factions inside the institution pushed conflicting visions of the monarchy's future. Some palace officials even feared leaks could eventually trigger broader public constitutional debates that the crown would struggle to contain. And despite official silence from every senior royal household, insiders claim the monarchy's carefully maintained image of unity had already suffered severe internal strain behind closed doors. And yet, according to those closest to the palace, the final decision about the monarchy's future may still rest with William himself. Inside royal circles, many now describe William's walkout not as a moment of anger, but as a warning. A signal that the next era of the monarchy may be shaped by an heir increasingly unwilling to tolerate blurred lines, hidden arrangements, or private influence operating behind the authority of the crown. According to palace insiders, the significance of that moment continues to grow with every passing week. What initially appeared to outsiders as a dramatic reaction inside a tense council meeting has allegedly evolved into something far larger inside the House of Windsor itself. Senior aides now whisper that William's decision to walk away from the chamber marked the beginning of a deeper institutional reckoning. One that may ultimately reshape the monarchy for an entirely new generation. Because beneath the constitutional language, the procedural memorandums, and the carefully controlled silence, the future king reportedly sent a message that could not be misunderstood. The structure of royal authority must remain unmistakably clear, even when emotional loyalties inside the family make that clarity painfully difficult to preserve. Reports suggest William has already begun privately discussing the importance of stricter constitutional boundaries once he eventually ascends the throne. Sources familiar with internal conversations claim the Prince of Wales increasingly believes the monarchy cannot survive another period where unofficial influence structures are allowed to grow unchecked behind palace walls. To William, insiders suggest, the crisis surrounding the succession memorandum exposed vulnerabilities that had remained hidden for years beneath ceremonial tradition and public appearances. What frightened him most was not merely the proposal itself, but how close it allegedly came to becoming normalized within the institution before resistance finally emerged. At the same time, the company. Enfrontation reportedly strengthened alliances between William, Princess Anne, and Prince Edward in ways few palace observers fully anticipated. According to royal commentators, the three now represent what many inside the institution view as the stabilizing core of the monarchy's future. Anne remains the iron guardian of continuity and constitutional discipline. Edward continues operating as the careful protector of institutional order behind the scenes. And William, insiders claim, has now fully embraced the reality that preserving the crown may require difficult confrontations, even within his own family. Together, palace whispers suggest, they have formed a powerful alliance shaped not by personal ambition, but by a shared belief that hereditary legitimacy must remain beyond question during the monarchy's next chapter. Catherine, meanwhile, reportedly emerged as one of the most stabilizing figures during the escalating internal tensions. Sources close to Kensington Palace claim the Princess of Wales played a crucial role in maintaining calm as emotions intensified behind closed doors. While others became consumed by constitutional battles and private resentment, Catherine alleged. Lily focused on preserving unity within her immediate family and protecting George, Charlotte, and Louis from the emotional fallout surrounding the crisis. Insiders whisper that her quiet composure during this period deeply strengthened William's reliance on her judgment, particularly as pressure surrounding the future of the monarchy continued mounting around them both. Palace officials now reportedly believe future reforms could dramatically reduce the possibility of unofficial influence structures developing around the crown ever again. Sources claim certain succession protocols and advisory procedures are already being quietly reconsidered in response to the backlash triggered by the council confrontation. Some insiders even suggest the monarchy may eventually formalize stricter limitations surrounding ceremonial consultation and transitional authority in order to prevent similar crises from emerging during future reigns. And according to royal historians, the controversy has reignited one of the oldest debates within the monarchy itself. Where exactly should the line exist between marriage, royal partnership, and hereditary constitutional legitimacy? For many observers, that question station now sits at the very heart of Charles's reign. Royal commentators increasingly argue that the crisis exposed long-hidden vulnerabilities beneath the polished image of modern royalty. Beneath the pageantry, the ceremonies, and the carefully managed appearances, the monarchy remains an institution built upon fragile balances of trust, hierarchy, and historical continuity. Once those balances begin shifting, even slightly, the consequences can ripple through generations. Some historians now believe Charles's reign may ultimately be remembered not simply as a period of transition following Queen Elizabeth II, but as an era when the monarchy was forced to confront unresolved tensions between personal loyalty and constitutional duty. Inside palace corridors, one phrase has reportedly begun circulating more frequently among senior aides: the walkout that changed the monarchy. Whether history ultimately views that description as dramatic exaggeration or uncomfortable truth remains impossible to know. But according to those closest to the institution, the deeper impact of William's decision is already being felt behind closed doors. Because for the first time in years, the future did. Direction of the monarchy no longer appears fully settled. It is being debated, defended, quietly reshaped in real time by the very people who will eventually inherit it. Because behind the gilded doors of the palace, one truth now hangs heavier than ever before. In the House of Windsor, power is never simply inherited, it is defended. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.